It is so much fun to get to follow the last session, which I think was really pushing a lot of boundaries of how we even try to have these conversations. And I think with this group, we are really fortunate to have a bunch of folks who are deeply in the moment of how AI is impacting our day-to-day and moment-to-moment activities. And so I wanted to start off really with, okay, so here we have this collection of folks who have developed virtual worlds, who have developed the technologies that we all use to use the internet every day, folks who have figured out how to bend that technology to their will repeatedly. Practically, like, how is actually using AI changing what you're doing day to day right now? Not like the 6 months down the road, but like right now, how is it changing what you do? And with this one, we're gonna just go to everybody. And Paul, why don't we start down at your end and come down the line?
Get the mic for that. How is it changing what I do? I mean, I would say I've worn many different hats over the years. I've been a product manager, I've been a designer, I've been an engineer, and now I would say I'm doing everything all at once at a pace that far outpaces most teams I've been on an individual basis now, and that comes with a really interesting, unique set of challenges. I mean, for example, I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but for example, in hindsight, hindsight is always 20/20, but I got these headaches a couple of months ago, and I thought, well, where do those headaches come from? And I realized I'm reading thousands and thousands, like hundreds of thousands of lines of code because I didn't trust the output from the AI. Right? Now, as a programmer before, that just never used to be the bottleneck because you're writing your own code. It doesn't make any sense, right? Unless maybe you're like a tech lead and you're reviewing the code of your peers, but for me, that's not reality anymore. I'm a solo founder. And so you ran into these interesting bottlenecks, even though you're running at a mind-boggling pace, and I'm finding more and more of those. And I'm always on. I'm realizing I'm moving much faster, and I'm moving with much higher fidelity also, but it's a very tiring way of working. Yeah.
Well, I thought I'd maybe think a little bit about the last session and the human interaction, and maybe take a slightly different approach to answering. And my brief answer is the clarity of my own thought. So it's a period where I do want to tell some stories from the past. There's a whole Mozilla story. I don't want it to get lost. It's a very communal story. There's a lot of thinking about. It's easy to write, write an incident or that, but what's the story? And how to actually get help. And so the clarity of what are the instructions? What is the role? What is my point of view? Am I trying to tell my story with a Mozilla lens? Am I trying to tell Mozilla's story, of which I'm a part? How do I think through that? And how is it different with different instructions and prompts? And so I've found that oddly, it's not a de-skilling piece so much as a refocusing piece and trying to find the clarity to give good, crisp direction or instruction, and try to get further before you are iterating. Just a little further each time before you get a response and then are like, oh, that wasn't what I wanted. How do I get closer?
I guess one thing I could add that might be interesting, we were just starting to talk about this before the session. My old company, my company Second Life, which I started 25 years ago, is a big old thing. And the impact of AI on it is, one, less obvious and harder to estimate than other things. So I'm struck by this. I've seen some fighting in the media, I think most recently a couple of days ago with Google about this, where the debate was, is AI helping us program faster? And maybe with these big old company projects, it's complicated. On the other hand, and as another radical set of questions, as a single individual working on a new project, which I'm also doing right now on my own, I would say that it's flipped completely over. That is, things are so fast, we don't even know how to approach it. I don't even know whether to read Twitter and look at the latest tool I should be using other than the one I'm using for prototyping versus just doing more prototyping, right? Like one might be exponentially faster than the other. So I would just say that this difference between how we work on older, more mature things with the tools we have today in AI versus how we might work on something that's entirely new are so strikingly different that it's remarkable.
So I like to say that AI has improved my productivity a lot, but I think the reality is a bit more subtle than that. Definitely, there are a lot of things I can pass on to AI, and I'm very happy for that. There even this kind of notion that if your AI is not working behind you right now, then you're kind of losing on stuff. So people are kind of adjusting there to the physics sleep and stuff. But the reality is, when we actually kind of measure productivity, I feel there's still a bit of limitation. I think the key is really adjusting, like basically kind of knowing expectation for AI, but also kind of adjusting sort of like a kind of how human work. So one thing is like we can use AI to do a lot of coding, even automatic debugging and automatic experimentations. So it's very powerful, but it can definitely generate like some slop. So if you don't let it, for example, if you're just like measuring the success based on number of lines of code that people commonly do at like, software IT startup companies, then you're gonna come with a lot of technical debt. And it's gonna, even with AI, it's gonna get harder and harder to kind of create that. Another thing I kind of find that limits my productivity is that it's extremely different mode of working. So previously, when I work on my PhD or engineering and kind of stuff, I spend like 3 hours implementing one idea and stuff. So I can debug for like say 3 hours or something like that. But now, what's kind of expected right now is like every 5 minutes, every 1 minute, you need to come up with a good idea, and it's also have a lot of information, so it's like the input is enormous. There's a lot of code it generates, all the things you found from the internet, all the insights, all the even ideas, creativity, and then I digest it, and then I got output like crazy. So suddenly it's like, I feel so useless. I feel so unproductive. We can start from there, yeah.
Well, that makes me want to ask, so in the audience, so how many of you have actively built or done something using AI in the last week? How many of you have had that experience of trying to keep up with this tireless, infinitely well-read, infinitely productive AI system and just, it's a very different experience. And when we talk about ideas like this is the first technology in human history that has partnered with us, there's a really interesting question about what it means to partner with something so tireless, so enthusiastic, so desperate to be helpful, because that is how it's been trained. And I think aligned with that, and a little bit, I'm going to go to Mitchell, but Philip, you and Mitchell both kind of hit this. One of the founding ideas behind Second Life was we would scale the creativity by having more people involved. And open source is obviously a very similar model to that, where if you can actually have enough eyes on everything, all problems become shallow, and you get to actually build this community while you are building the product and the experience. Mitchell, I'm kind of curious, you've had to weather like every generation of open source contributors and participation and backlash and the backlash. We're now in a period of open source projects in particular really trying to figure out how to navigate AI contributions and AI-assisted contributions and leveraging AI for the maintenance of their products. How are you thinking about that? How do you think open source should be thinking about that?
Well, first I'll say that open source covers the gamut. And so I think
it's a simple, small question, right?
Yeah, you'll see everything. So open source has its share of people who don't like change. And it certainly has its share of people who are aware of what can go wrong with technology and want open technology so you can address it. And so there is a part of the community that's sort of very anti-anything. And I think that's fine. Human beings have a wide diversity. And, to try and answer your question, other than from that part of the open source world, we had many similar questions about what is enterprise AI. because open source started in an academic world and then volunteer projects, and Mozilla was the first. We came out of Netscape, so we were an enterprise AI organization attracting individuals. And so there was a big process and a lot of questions, and how would someone who worked for a company and the company owns their IP, how does that all fit in, and what are the processes, and what do you do about it? And it's not really that different. There's a bit of existential stuff in that, a company is a legal person. It has personhood. It's immortal. So existentially, maybe it's not that different. It's a corporate personhood, and now we have a different kind of identity. Even if you're on the extreme, you think of them as a person. Not everyone does, but so, I think there's a lot of precedent for it. And then there's all the existential questions of what does it mean to be human, and I think those things for many open source projects will fade. I think the results are important. So there's some open source projects that, one purpose of them is learning and growth of people, or one facet of them or side effect of them is you don't have to go to some Stanford, for example. We're here, so you don't have to go to Stanford to actually learn something about how projects work. And if that's the goal, then you want to make sure that whether you're accepting AI contributions or not, that your processes are set up to continue to do that. But I think, depending on the result and what the automated testing is, I think a lot of open source projects, and certainly if I were running one, which I'm not currently, but if I were, I'd be very open to AI contributions and what are the processes and what's the learning that goes around them.
So, Philip, I'm going to come to you following that, because the piece, and Mitchell, I love that you hit this. There's such a part of the growth of the community and the people involved. Philip, for as long as we've worked together and as long as we've known each other, it's been how do we build multi-user, community, teams, groups trying to collaborate. And there's a certain irony that the vast majority of AI use right now is somebody sitting alone on their phone or a chat window talking to somewhere between 1 and 30 other AIs, but it's all of them just talking in these one-on-one, single-threaded conversations. I'm curious how you think about not just where we are, but the lessons we've learned building multi-user products, building multi-user, multi-community products, and how that ties up to AI and what you're hoping to see going forward.
Well, as you and I remember and know, we used to talk a lot about things like Coase's theorem, right? Which was this idea that the very purpose of a company was driven by the transaction cost of negotiating. That is, in a world where you could negotiate with someone in a millisecond for what they were going to do the whole of next month for you, you might not have companies at all because everyone would just shuttle around. And indeed, in the last conversation, we were talking about this distinction between hierarchical forms of sort of delegated responsibility versus transactional commerce. And I think ideas like Multibook or something, of just agents paying each other or maybe even paying humans for things. One observation I would make about co-creation, which is I think what we spent so much time working together on, is that there are a variety of opportunities and also a variety of probably strange problems that will come out of this. Like, I know in open source right now there's this, potential instability around identity, right? That if humans are anonymous and they're submitting changes to open source projects, there's a certain set of problems you might have with that. But if agents are themselves also anonymous and are submitting changes to open source projects at a speed which is extraordinary compared to anything we've ever seen, you're going to get into probably some entirely new problems and resolutions that we've never seen before. So I guess I would, I would just say, yeah, I think we're going to see some co-creative problems and opportunities that are very novel, the same way that we did in Second Life as we started letting people, kind of build with their digital hands.
Shane, I'm going to come to you off to that one. So we did this panel. This is our third year of doing this panel. Last year, we had a discussion about how important agents were, and was there even a definition of agents? And if you think back to the distant past of, April of 2025, a group of folks, including you and me, we're like, well, agents are just, it's just looping questions to an LLM, and it's really powerful, but eh. And since then, a few other things have happened. We were, Moltbook got talked about in the last session. OpenClaw has caused every Mac studio in existence to be sold. It is sort of interesting times that we are living in now. I'm curious, so there's all this capacity for agents to be moving very, very fast. We've now had everybody talk about trying to keep up with them. Philip started alluding to, well, how do you handle the approvals of all these things coming into open source projects? I'm curious how you think about it, somebody who's actively both working with and on technology. Where should humans be in the loop here, and how do we even navigate those questions? Because if you have something that can be, depending upon how much energy and money we want to put into it, sort of infinitely productive, are we just gatekeepers on every decision? Are we just going to slow this whole system down? How do we break that?
Yeah, these are pretty big questions. But looking back kind of 1 year ago, right, I think something that definitely is the user experience. So, how the model is deployed, how it's sort of writing the terminal, writing your kind of productive workflow, have access to pretty much all execution kind of flows, right? That was kind of critical. The other thing is really if the modeling lab themselves, like Anthropic, Google DeepMind, OpenAI, they themselves, how much they're automating their workflow with that. So I mentioned on the last panel, like kind of question, but online learning. But really, the online learning is very powerful. It's very, the different ways you can do RL, or you can do sort of more human-in-the-loop way. But it's very powerful, like that kind of stuff. Once you embed your AI system, it can start out maybe 60%, 70% performance, like completely not usable without human supervision. But as you correct those kind of like where that model make the mistake one by one, this kind of process is actually very scalable. So the kind of process that takes from the models to autonomously operate from 1 minute to 10 minutes could be very similar to from 10 minutes to 10 hours. So I think we're going to see a lot of surprise from this kind of online learning, especially now with more and more deployments. I think the AI is going to improve even kind of faster on that. And then the one kind of point is kind of how humans should kind of handle it. Honestly, as I kind of mentioned in the previous comment, is like we're pretty much the bottleneck. Right now, I think we can be much, much more productive if the AI is kind of more embedded, and then we can have like a way to process all the information, make decisions rapidly, be creative very rapidly. How we should kind of deal with this kind of era, I think we should co-evolve. AI is going to learn a lot based on this kind of like online kind of human feedback, but also the human need to learn from what AI can do, what AI can bring for us. So for me, the past 3 months, it was tiring, but it's a really exciting process about, okay, how can I change myself? How can I evolve myself to work on this era and probably that era kind of coming next? A lot of points is like, how active, like you need to be extremely active and so-driven, I think, to do well in this era. And I think we can talk more on there as well.
I think kind of as a perfect lead-in, Paul, I'm going to bounce down to you. Paul, you had actually had a post recently. So I've known Paul back from doing games in the early Facebook platform and Zynga era, always building really cool stuff. And often in these very bespoke areas of computer science where, oh yeah, we're doing graphical work in the browser in 2008, which, let's be clear, was not common code paths to be exercising. And you had this post up where you were doing some pretty in-depth shader work, and it ended up taking you in a pretty unexpected direction. And I'm wondering, especially building off of this idea of how far do you let the agent go while you're working?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the unique position to actually have a bunch of open source projects right now that are kind of gaining steam, and so I've also faced AI contribution dilemmas, and yeah, that one I needed a few shaders for my personal website. I wanted to reboot it, so I started building some shaders, and I realized, oh, actually, like Claude built more shaders than I wanted. Just like kind of neat. Like, what do I do with them? And then I went down this rabbit hole and built 100 of them, actually like thousands of them, but then I trimmed them down to maybe 100. And it's, for the last couple of months, I'm really trying to figure out where are the boundaries of what's achievable with AI models today. And that's why I went down that particular rabbit hole, because the feedback loop is right now still really fuzzy, especially when it comes to visual feedback loop. Opus multimodal capabilities. I mean, Opus 4.7 came out today, a bit better, but not nearly as strong as Gemini's multimodal capabilities. But then much stronger in other areas. And then there's like the harness, right? So the tooling on top of the model. For instance, certain browser use tools can iterate for you, can zoom into a particular area in the browser, take a snapshot, but then they have no temporal understanding, right? If you're building a shader, and there's probably something animated on screen, very likely. I built this rain shader, and the rain was moving upwards. And I can't blame the model for that. It's going to see frame by frame sampling. It's like, I built the shader. It's good, right? I did my job. And so there's still a lot of... it's interesting you mentioned the time of like trying to push graphical browser gaming back then in like 2010 or something. I don't know. I think if we were in 2010 and we were in an alternate dimension where AI is already far advanced in 2010, and we were trying to do that, we would still have failed with AI. Why? Because we were pushing the absolute cutting edge of technology. Not to toot my own horn, but really, like we were figuring things out that browser vendors at the time thought were crazy. Like, you should not use this technology for this, right? That kind of thing. Like I remember I read like books on like cell phone networking technology to figure out how much of a window I have until like, I get the first byte from a cell tower. And that's not something unusual front-end developer worries about. So I think there are synthesizing like common knowledge and then giving it to you in a form that you can repackage is very easy for current models. Very great for things like enterprise UI, for example, right? Any software that actually benefits from stability, benefits from UX stability, but also code stability. But I think if you want to build something that is truly creative, you want to push the boundaries, it's still very challenging, and I think the tooling is not there yet. And so that's what excites me, really. So
over this last weekend, I ended up doing a project that was only possible because of AI. There was an Air Force colonel named John Boyd. He invented the OODA loop, which many people will throw around as this very simplistic orient, observe, decide, act as a little circle. And it's important to know that he never drew that. He actually instead had a 8-hour approximately presentation on this topic that he delivered literally thousands of times, refining this idea over 20, 30 years. And the problem was, because this was all in the 80s, the only thing that survives are these really like cassette tapes of him speaking that have been copied 7 times, and then photocopies of these acetate slides he used. And it was really frustrating, because if you've ever tried to just read transcripts, it's really unpleasant. But I grew up reading the Feynman lectures, which were also built from transcripts, but they were hand-edited by an army of academics who then carefully went through and turned them into readable text that still captured Feynman's voice. And I thought, this seems like a plausible thing for AI to do. And so over the course of a few hours a night over the weekend, pulled, 14 hours of transcripts, and Gemini, great at transcribing, it turns out, even from really horrific audio tapes. And 200,000 words down to 150,000 words that are readable. What was interesting is none of the models could handle his hand-drawn diagrams. They could very quickly create a tool for me to copy his his hand-drawn diagrams, but they couldn't handle even relatively simple diagrams. So Philip, I'm going to come to you on this. I suspect if it's a year from now when we're doing the 4th version of this panel, we will be like, and it's funny because last year we weren't talking about world models at all. And I think that's what we're going to be hearing a lot about between now and a year from now. Something that we've always talked about is AI should be spending as much time as possible in games and virtual worlds, because what a great place to be learning rule sets, that rain falls down, that things, people don't pass through walls, that people stand on the ground. And as someone who's still got a huge virtual world that's operating every day with people in it, like, how are you thinking about AI in that world, what it brings to players, what the world brings to AI, and just how you're contemplating where to spend time and attention with AI there?
Well, first of all, you were mentioning earlier the difference between the idea of an agent last year and the idea of an agent now. And you said something that struck me there, and I think is related to this, which is that an agent, I think you were saying that at the outset it seemed like, well, this is just a loop where an LLM is, we're just mashing go over and over again, and then it's maybe kind of got a to-do list or something like that. But I'm struck as well as I think you were in saying that by how little an understanding or how much more complexity seems to be in that looping than what we might initially have thought. And of course, I'm working on a couple of, I'm working on a couple of projects now. I'm on the board of a thing called CIMC, which is the California Institute for Machine Consciousness, which is a research organization looking at consciousness and how it arises in agents and other things. And so this is, to some extent, my day-to-day work right now. I think that, yeah, the thing next year that we'll be talking about is the various advances in the memories, the recollections, the state of these AIs, and I think that I know, I'd say 100%, we'll have amazing discoveries that'll probably make this conversation feel very outmoded. I wonder whether text descriptions, again, in the last panel, we were talking about the that idea of a world of text versus a world of other things. I wonder whether we will describe world models initially with text. There's great debate about this. Whether these sort of geometric deep learning models or other types of models will be more important in building world models. But yeah, I think that virtual worlds like Second Life have the unique property that they present a sort of physics, which, as you know, was very much what we were, especially at the outset with Second Life, trying to do. We were trying to create a physically plausible universe that humans could also wander around in. In fact, as Corey remembers, the initial kind of aspiration I had for Second Life was actually that it was a kind of a weird Garden of Eden that perhaps contained only emergent organisms, and that maybe we just charged people to go in and wander around in there and just find funny things and take pictures or something. And then as time went by,
our business sense was spectacular.
Yeah, as time went by, we were like, yeah, that seems like a tall order to imagine that people are going to do that in 2000. But yeah, I think it's all going to be about the right kinds of worlds for AIs to build their models within. And I do think there's an argument to be made and continues to be made that things like Second Life are at least directionally correct in creating kind of plausible physics for AIs.
So it's easy to have these discussions and kind of only spend the time talking about how glorious and wonderful AI is and everything's going to be smooth and nothing weird will happen. We've seen in just the last week a frontier model company decide not to release a model generally because of the potential for misuse. We had in the last session a really great discussion about online training, what that means when we talk about models, what that means when we talk about alignment. We didn't even talk about the fact that either the users or the trainers of those models might not actually have our best intentions at heart. And so, and Mitchell, I'm going to come down to you, but I think really this is for you and maybe Shane both. I'm curious, we have a bunch of leaders in the audience. They are all thinking about, well, how much should they be worried about AI today? You built a product for years that had to be more concerned about security than just about anyone. And how should people who are thinking about putting products out into the field today when what used to just be script kiddies having an ability to crack passwords are about to be script kiddies who have access to frontier models, which means you now have a vulnerability lab available at the push of a button. How does that change what we're doing with technology, with user data, et cetera? Another easy question to you. You got all the easy ones.
You know, I feel a little differently about the model you referred to. One thing that it's easy to forget today is our software is not safe, it's not secure. Every piece of software has 0 days in it. If you live in that world, you know that. And we did, at Firefox or Mozilla, it wasn't that we were able to produce software that didn't have those in them. We wish we could. What we were able to do was drive the industry to be more honest about them and to actually fix them through our transparency process. And that took some work. You would be surprised at the big name computer companies that would sit on known 0 days because it's too inconvenient to release off-cycle, inconvenient and expensive. And so that's a social fix. So I think, hallelujah, we know our software is not good enough. We know it's not secure. It's not just script kiddies. It's governments. It's rogue agencies. It's the United States. It's, it's Israel. It's not just like the countries the United States, likes to name as bad actors, right? It's everyone. This software is not good enough. So I think, hallelujah, that we have a new tool. Now, yes, it can be misused. All the tools that exist today are being misused. Every piece of software you're using probably has 0 days in them. Some percentage of them are known, and some percentage of them are being used today. We just don't know how many. So I think absolutely the development of a tool that can find these better is really valuable. The questions are, who has it, who uses it, what's the scale, what's the rollout, and it won't be the last one. I mean, in the industry, there's an ongoing arms race between those of us who are trying to create safe and secure products for consumers and those who are trying to break them. And that arms race is all the time. So AI isn't going to change that. Right, it is a new set of tools, but I think that if the tools can be deployed, if the social aspects of those tools are managed properly so that those, shipping consumer products who mostly have an incentive to make them safe, not completely, that's why it was one of Mozilla's big things, is to try and change the incentives. I think it's really valuable. There's, of course, a lot of questions. If you don't have access to that tool, that's a problem. I appreciated seeing that there was some allocation for open source projects. You might debate the numbers and the size of that, 4 million, I think, the allocation to open source projects. At least it's an acknowledgement, maybe there's something to be built on there, and what is open and what is not. And then there's what is the release schedule. Part of me is like, these giant companies that most of us are living our lives in, maybe those are the right tool platforms, but where do they get to? And then, although I'm a huge proponent that open is absolutely fundamental to, healthy relationship between technology and society, you do want to give some thought to when and where and how and how do you use and implement those tools? And I think that's the real question about this new capability.
Do you have, that's such a good setup. Let me just stay with you for a moment. Okay, as queen for a day, what is the right, what would you recommend there?
I would construct. And with the caveat that when you're in the middle of building and distributing software, there's always a million questions, right? But we'll make it a little aspirational then. I would construct a system which allowed those who have software projects, particularly those in use, it's probably tiered by what's the usage basis, to have access. I mean, in the world, there's the white hats and, maybe it's there's the good hats and the bad hats and the gray hats in the middle. And you want to build a system where those people who are shipping software and trying to do the right thing have the access to it, which is not a fully maximize your profit system.
Jane, I'm going to actually just keep this conversation coming to you for a minute because obviously this is germane to your thinking as well. How do you think about the sort of the same question here of we have models that have these incredible capabilities. We're also trying to ship software that is safe and secure. How do you think about balancing that? How should leaders who are relying on software, who don't have the expertise that this panel has on AI, how should they be thinking about the emerging threats, what decisions they should be making in response?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a great question. One aspect is that so far when we talk about like AI safety and then this kind of capability, we're mostly kind of evaluating the model on its own. But really with the AI agent, you need to kind of think about the environment and the model together. So interestingly, 5 years ago, I organized like the first workshop at the NERPS called Ecological Theory of Reinforcement Learning, really kind of putting the focus not to the agent, but more to the sort of environment. You can shape the environment to make the like learning easier. You can also shape the environment such that the agent, however powerful the learning algorithm is, could maybe kind of stay safe. So this has to be, I think, studied very jointly. So when I think this kind of AI agent era, we talk about sort of post-training evaluation and stuff, but I think the difficulty and amount of work, it's basically just like easily kind of 100x right now because of that.
Staying on this topic, and Shane, I'm going to just stay with you for a moment. Something that, again, I think it's important for audience members who maybe aren't used to thinking this way to understand is one of the threat vectors that's very unexpected to humans is the inability for agents to understand the difference between data and instruction, right? This idea of if you can inject a sufficiently credible instruction into something that is data, you can often get the agent to go off and do your bidding. This is talked about often as prompt injection. It's often talked about as the lethal trifecta, where if you have untrusted data that you are then acting on as an agent with an egress route, guess what? All of your data is at risk. And Google actually is the only paper I've seen on this so far, this notion of camel, where you have models that are either quarantined or not, starts giving you maybe a chance to approach this. But I'm curious, do you think this is a problem that we're just going to engineer our way out of, where models will get so reliable on this it won't be a problem? Or do you think something like quarantines are going to be the long-term solution here?
So if you're kind of like good actor, I think, because fundamentally the model is a statistical model, so you kind of mainly kind of follow the pattern, and there's a lot of work that definitely could be done to go against this sort of attacks. It could even be kind of bad, there could be like a sleeper kind of like model where actually like some malicious actors may train the model in certain ways. So if you kind of insert some special thing somewhere, it can behave very differently. So there are those kind of things. But I think the model training stuff is powerful enough that you can over time make it approach, at least like, it won't be like kind of crazy, kind of like humans, that it can distinguish those kind of things, yeah.
Does everybody know what a compiler attack is? This is a weird, the computer scientists in the room know. So if you really want to hack something over a long period of time, what you do is you hack the compiler so that every piece of code built forever is now hacked. And a good compiler attack is completely undetectable and is something that gives you like night terrors if you're a computer scientist and shipping particularly in regulated markets. And AI models, particularly because AI models tend to be distilled into future models, that would seem to be something that might keep you awake at night. However, we've spent enough time on the scary things. I'm going to bounce down to Paul for a moment. There was a lot of discussion in the last panel about creativity. And I think that shader example sort of leads into this question of, are we just, kind of trying to carve out space for humans? Like we'll be like, oh, like we're still the creative ones, please, or is it we just haven't found the right tooling to be able to explore more creative spaces with AI, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think there's like great arguments to be made for both, and I think it's probably a little bit of a mix. And don't think I have all the answers, but what I will say, if you look at history and the history of art in particular, a lot of people say that it's the intent that makes something art or not, right? I mean, when photography first became a thing, painters were not very happy about it when they saw like the first photographers doing art shows, art galleries, right? Because they painted a mountain for a month, and then somebody else takes a snapshot of that mountain with their camera. It's like, this is art, right? And of course, we are having all the same conversations now, and not just in art, not just in images or video or audio, but also in code, right? How much, if I prompt something, and if I don't know, if I prompt a shader library, but I haven't written a single line of code in the shader library, have I made it, right? And I think it's an interesting question, but I do think that intent and focus matters. And I think the one interesting question, I mean, I built tools that enable creatives now and make you more creative in the process with AI. But I often ask myself critically, who is in control? And who am I building for? Do I make AI better at design, or do I make a human better at design using AI? Which are very different things. Now, they might complement each other, but ultimately I'm in this game to empower humans, to help humans get superpowers with the help of AI. Now, again, I do find the previous session really interesting, and I do think we can develop a symbiotic relationship with AIs in the future. I think the current iteration of AI maybe, to me, isn't really there yet. It's like, I mean, we can go philosophical, but I'm going to stay away from that for now. One interesting aspect that I want to circle back on, and I promise we can move on from the security thing, but you mentioned, sort of alluded to the supply chain idea, right? And I actually think my most valuable contribution right now are my ideas. And that was something we talked about previously in the other panels as well. And the ideas are written in words and not in code. And I've actually shipped an open source project that generates its own code. And so you basically, you download the prompt and you paste it into your agent, and it will generate the code that it needs for your current situation, your current framework, your current project. It's really weird, this idea, right? I mean, it's similar to a compiler in some ways, but it does actually is really good for security in enterprise contexts, because it's a weaker attractor for black hat teams, right? Because now you're kind of like writing your supply chain risks away. So it's interesting, yeah.
It's fine. We didn't actually, we shared some of the questions beforehand, but we did not share that one, and that tees up exactly what I wanted to end on here before we turn it over to all of you. So you have about 2 minutes to start getting your best and hardest questions ready for Philip. And but before we do that, I'm curious, what do you think is going to surprise the audience that you believe will happen with AI before the end of the year? And the reason I'm smiling, Paul, is because the example I was going to use is, I think, in mainstream large-scale software development, this sense of write-only software. In other words, you give a spec or a conformance suite to an AI, and it writes the code, it tests the code, it evaluates the code, and it ships the code without a human looking at it, will be considered totally mainstream in a way that right now it is in the Claudebot fringe spaces. So that would be my prediction for this year. But why don't we just go down the line, Shane?
Before the end of the year, right? Yeah. I mean, this year, so first of all, like, a lot of the resource is going to be concentrated on based on capitalism. And this year is going to be the year of the coding and the agent. Consulting, those kind of area as well. Basically kind of high-paying, kind of white-collar works. Okay, maybe kind of to add to that, because this year I think is going to be the focus on those, maybe like some of the work that, outside of kind of coding, but it's kind of very agentic, could be well within the scope.
I want to answer with a non-answer, which is to say that what's fascinating about Corey's question, specifically at the timeline just at the end of this year, is that I would say to an extraordinary extent, I really don't know. I wouldn't believe in anything that I would tell you for that. And in fact, I jokingly lately say, short anyone who thinks they know what's going to happen next. I remember 1994, which was when my career started working on the internet. That was when I, started, working on things. And the internet, like AI, was a very large space of possibilities. There was little doubt, but that it was going to have a big impact on us. What's different was that if you were an engineer working on the internet in 1994, you could make reasonable statements about what the next year might bring. And you all were kind of on the same page. I mean, if you were talking to someone like Mitchell, in those days, we were talking about firewalls and routing and browser standards and stuff. We all kind of knew the playbook.
Like streaming might start working.
Yeah.
Right.
No, not then. Too soon.
Yeah, too soon. But so that's my answer is, isn't it fascinating that we're at a moment where I feel reluctant to even attempt to answer that question, though I may have many ideas about it?
Actually, my thought was similar. I think almost everything will happen. So are tools supporting humans being more creative? Are they supporting AIs? All of it's going to happen. Are the AIs engaging with each other in a marketplace or who knows what? Are we building multiple layers? Sure. Like, all that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go a bit outside of the actual harness capabilities itself, I would argue. I mean, I agree with all of you. I also, it's very hard to predict, but I think, and I also agree with you, Mitchell, I think everything will happen all at once everywhere. I submitted a talk to an AI conference that is literally called Everything Everywhere All at Once. But my take would be, I think there's probably going to be a single person company by the end of the year that has $1 billion valuation.
And for real, and not just a made-up New York Times story. So we're going to take questions in a couple batches. So who has questions? And if not, we will start asking you all questions. Yeah, see, that works every time. Yep, always does.
I had a question that's a little similar to where Mitchell was just going. I work in the legal AI space, and one of the big questions is people negotiate, and people are trying to use AI to help improve their position and understanding in order to negotiate. But will we be in a position, whether it's 6 months or a year maybe, where people will just say, my agent's going to negotiate with your agent, we'll get comfortable whenever those agents came up, and there won't be a human in the loop?
Do we have another question to pair up with that? Otherwise, we'll throw that one to, I think, Mitchell first, but anybody else on the panel who wants to answer. All right, we've stunned you up. There we go.
Just building up on the previous question, I really would like to hear how the human in the loop would change in the future, because, we don't want to make that statistic, the bottleneck too much. And I heard somebody said like that role can be more not static in a sense that, in this process, human really needs to be in there, but, you can be more like, I don't know how to say it, but if there is anything that AI cannot resolve, or, there will be some ideas of how AI would exercise their judgment to see when they would need human to pull in. So would that be a plausible design?
Those are both great. Why don't we start with the, you just hand all your negotiations off to the AI, talk to the other AIs.
So I suspect that's going to be unlikely for a while. So before open source, I was involved in a lot of negotiations about technology. Like Netscape Navigator had 100 or 200 pieces of software that someone else wrote. And so to be able to, so there may be some simple things if you're going to go back and forth on what's the limitation of liability, but ultimately those are power and who wants the deal more. So I think to hand something off on a legal negotiation, you need a hugely personalized and in-depth understanding both of the structure and operations, but also of the risk profile, and also what's like the secret hidden thing that you or your org is trying to protect. And so it's certainly in 6 months, I think it would be hard to get all of that in one place. So your question is asked, I think that's way too soon. And I'm going to have to imagine, like, trying to write enough to understand a risk decision on my competitors over here doing X, and I think in 6 months they're going to do Y, and I want to be able to do Z, and what does that look like? That's complicated, so I think that's going to be a ways down the road.
Although maybe the balance to that is based on how many lawyers have been sanctioned for turning in uncritically ChatGPT-generated legal reports, it's clearly already happening. And so because certainly any of you who are software engineering managers, if you believe your teams are writing software without AI, they're lying to you. And so they're just not fessing up to the fact that they're asking questions to AI on the side, or they're cutting, pasting back and forth. And so the use is too ubiquitous. Actually, there was a great session a year ago on this about the revealed preferences on AI, where there, especially among younger Americans, there's a lot of answering of questions of like, well, no, we don't want to use AI. We're less engaged with it. But then the revealed preference of the actual use is that AI usage is off the charts. And guess what? That applies to lawyers, that applies to software engineers, that applies to doctors, that applies to...
I might see, I would answer differently if it was, what's the original drafting? Right. But in this question of, is your CEO going to sign their name on a document with a business result when you haven't been through the risk process? That seems slower to me.
Yeah, one hopes not.
Can I take a quick step on the human in the loop one, because I think it's really interesting. So lately I've been feeling like, so one of the advisory roles that I have is working on this enterprise climate SaaS platform. And I think there's like 2-3 areas of complexity for building something with AI. It's like durability, how long does the software have to live? Like what's the time horizon of building it, but also maintaining it? I think there's like fidelity, how visually complex does it need to be? And I forgot the third one. But my point being, lately, so it's a team of 5 people right now, I think. And I would say we're probably adding about 200 to 300,000 lines of code every day right now. And probably removing 50,000 or 100,000, right? Right now, I feel like I'm riding a Hydra with 12 heads, and I'm just trying to make it not crash anywhere, right? And because even if I'm using the best model right now, and there's only, about 2% drift in the code base, right? And it gets 2% worse in every PR, it just compounds so quickly that the tech debt accrued from that is at some point exponential. And so I think I guess my hot take here would be it's going to be a while until any serious projects will not require human in the loops for that reason.
Yeah, for the human in the loop, I think the thing is, as part of doing the human in the loop part, right, you need a lot of AI. So obviously, to verify the AI's output, you're going to use AI plus kind of human as well. And then kind of one natural kind of question that is really like, for every sort of, say, 100 tokens, 1,000 tokens, like, you generate, how many tokens should you allocate for verification purpose? You can do a lot of kind of multi-agent, you can do repeated, you can change the context, you can have pretty much an ensemble reiteration and that. And then you have an AI that's monitoring AI, but the AI also will hallucinate and make mistakes. So you're going to have a human loop process for the AI's human loop, and basically this will kind of keep going. But essentially, like, this whole process could be sort of as kind of full verification. So in a way, I think it's going to be like this, I think, for a while. And designing like a system that works the best is highly valuable for kind of any organization.
Do you think there's a rule of thumb for tokens of production versus tokens of...
Do you have something you want to share? Or
Tokens of production versus...
Tokens of production versus tokens of verification?
Yeah. What's the ratio that you use?
Great question. I think we're definitely burning way more tokens on verification right now. I mean, we have like multiple automated code reviews happening at the same time. And then we wrote this customized software called agent reviews that sort of like then closes them in a loop until every code reviewer is happy, right? And it sort of happens autonomously. autonomously, and sometimes we hijack the process. Yeah, I would definitely say it's probably like, I don't know, a ratio of 1 to 3 or something. Yeah.
I think it's such an interesting time for this. For those who don't follow it, Stripe has recently been making a lot of hay over the fact that they've built a system where basically anyone can just in Slack say, I want this feature, and then a bunch of agents go off and build the feature, and then the agents request human code reviews. Now, having done this professionally for more years than I'm willing to admit to on tape, code reviews, even for your friends, are not like the fun part of writing code. And you usually have to either force it, make it a rule, bribe people. The notion of just being a meat puppet that the AI is telling review my code feels like a dystopian hellscape. And so this is like one of the solutions that a serious company is bragging about in public and saying, isn't this great that we've created this system where all of our engineers are just code reviewers? And so that's sort of one extreme. And then, Ken actually raised the other extreme, which is before you know it, you've built a world-encompassing particle collider because the AIs thought it was a good idea. So clearly the two extremes, no oversight or constant oversight, are both probably not where we want to end up. And I think what's interesting to go all the way back to Dan's legal question, risk discounting or risk analysis seems to be where we have to get much better of, do we understand that the risk of not overseeing this decision, are we comfortable with the downsides of it? You look like you're...
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say the reason I get stressed and I want to evolve myself is I want to be on the idea generator. I want to keep being the idea generator, and then the active side, or if I don't do and if I stop, basically my future is the human data labeler.
Well, also one thing that I would say is like assessing risk, right? Or if you like have a model review your work, don't have it be the same model or like the same thread. Because one interesting observation is that AI models in a given context window are inherently highly biased towards what they've built, right? You really want somebody else to check.
It is a surprising, even no matter how much you try to create in different personas, the models do tend to agree with themselves, although different strength models will agree less. And so it's interesting to play around with that as well. We have time for one more wave of questions. Otherwise, maybe I will just turn back to our panel here. And the question that sort of we've hit on a few of these things. I'm curious where it's kind of the inverse. So we had a bunch of folks who were unwilling to make any predictions because, of course, apparently next year we will be debating not AGI, but the singularity, I think, is the interpretation of the back half of the panel, which would be a pretty exciting debate to be having. I'm curious whether there's anything where we would take a different stake, which is we're highly confident the AI still won't be good at this year, or is that just as high a risk? Yeah. Laughter means you go first.
Yeah. I was gonna say robotics. So I was kind of founding intern of kind of Google Brain robotics team, and then I know many kind of friends who are basically doing startups like Sunday Robotics and Journalist. They're making great progress, but essentially for robotics, we're a bit far from, say, GPT-4 kind of moment, and even after GPT-4, the ChatGPT moment, right, this kind of distribution moment, I think is way tougher for robotics than what was for like a digital sort of intelligence. So I think something that's not gonna definitely happen is the ChatGPT moment for robotics. But a few good friends of mine, they're working very, very hard, and I'm kind of impressed by some of the results. Yeah.
Yeah, that certainly seems like a space that's going to be moving slowly until it moves really fast, and because it brings in such an intersection of technology that has seemed so hard for so long.
Yeah, but everything is doable, as Joe said. So I became like AGI, 100% sort of in AGI. It's gonna come like 4 years ago, but essentially it's important to be AGI pilled. And AGI pilled is not like a blind belief that, it's like AGI is just gonna happen, but it's basically the acceptance that every sort of productive capability of our cognitive mind is possible to be somewhat, very reasonably kind of automated, and how do we accept that feature and adjust the way we work, the way we learn, the way we operate, everything toward that future.
Excellent. Anybody else want the last word on what we're still going to be doing better as humans this year?
And I have one. I'm going to be quick. So I worked with a lot of YouTube creators in my last role, and they've all been freaking out over AI, or many of them, because they figured out, hey, what is my role when everything is drowned out by AI, right? And my answer is usually the same, and so I'm going to give that one. Is I think the human struggle will not change. I think, can they simulate connection? Yeah, they can. Do they know the human struggle? No. Right? I mean, like, by definition, they're different beings, no matter how you feel about it. And so I think, well, I could watch like a heartthrob video of like an AI talking to me about heartbreak, but it will matter to me that it comes from another human, because we share the human struggle. So I wish that was my idea, but I learned that from like a Pixar director who talked about all the types of things that won't change and how they make movies. Yeah.
Philip?
I think that in a similar vein, and drawing some history from Second Life, people in Second Life dislike AI perhaps even more than people in other places. And obviously, with the trend of especially the last few months, I think there's a lot of concern about AI. And nowhere more do you see this than in Second Life. But a particular example of this, and I agree with you, Paul, is that I don't think we'll be at a place in the next year where I can get joy from the, say, artistic expression of a purely AI creation, for precisely that reason. There's something about the human experience that, we like each other, we love each other precisely because of our uniqueness, the things we don't know, our weaknesses in some sense. And I think that there is still a moment that we're probably not going to see in the next year or so, a GPT moment, if you will, where we really have a friend or something like that, or an artist, actually a pop star. A top pop star, I think, would be the one I would call out. We will not yet see a top pop star, despite the fact that the AIs can do pop music better than any pop star.
The irony, of course, being that there is a country singer right now who is purely synthetic, dominating the Apple Music charts.
I did hear that, yeah.
So it is an exciting time. So thank you all so much, and thank you, please, to the panelists for a bunch of really excellent questions or answers to hard questions.